Welcome to another episode of This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is an extension of a prior show that we had, Manhood and Masculinity. This one is focusing on the stories of manhood and masculinity. Not just what is masculinity, but why is it important for men to tell their story? How do their stories help the situation, and what do we gain from listening to other people's stories? I'm your host, Peter Holmes, and today I'm joined once again by Jim Jankiewicz, one of the key organisers behind the Men's Ministry Network here in Sydney, and a man with lots of experience with men's stories. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Good to be here there, Peter.
Before we get started, just a reminder that if you like the show, you should subscribe on your podcast app, and that way you won't miss an episode. Okay. Stories of masculinity. I mean, really, that's a fancy name for just men's stories, men telling stories. It sounds like a really obvious thing to say, that everyone's got a story and they should tell it. But the question is why, firstly, what's stopping us telling the story, Jim? I mean, most men, in fact, seem to have trouble telling their story. What do you think that is from?
It's our vulnerability, I suppose, and this ego, wanting to be right and wanting to be seen to be strong and wanting to be seen to have all the answers and not feeling comfortable in sharing that we are struggling, you know?
Yeah, so we're afraid of something, really, aren't we?
Yeah. Just exposing ourselves, you know?
Yeah. It's funny, I was talking to a mate of mine who's been through some pretty rough times, and he had listened to the Manhood episode, and he said, next time you do one on this, you don't need to talk about fear. I said, what do you mean? And he said, so many men are afraid. They're afraid that they're going to be exposed as a fraud, or that everyone will, they feel like they're fudging it and they don't know if they're really a man, and that everyone will mock them or laugh at them or make fun of them or something.
Yeah, we had a bit in the group sessions that I used to facilitate. We had a great acronym for fear, you know, and that is false evidence appearing real. Ooh. And this is when we're in our head anticipating stuff and thinking about how's it going to work out, rather than really trusting God and giving it over to Him and saying, I'm here to do your will. I want to be your child. I want to be a good child of God, Heavenly Father. And that fear, that is all in our head probably, you know, because we can't see the future. But I've sort of seen and realized that a lot of men have that fear, you know. They want to be able to see in the future and have a certain direction and control it all. And the fear of letting go of that and trusting God. So
the fear is to admit that you don't know it all. You don't know what's happening. Perhaps you might have stuffed up in some way. Perhaps you're not the best possible person all the time. But let's talk about what's bad about suppressing memories. I mean, what's so bad about not talking about it? I mean, surely some guys say, if I don't want to talk about it, what's the big deal? It doesn't matter. Why would we be worried about someone suppressing bad memories?
The big deal is it eats you up inside. It causes cancer, it causes ulcers, it causes all sorts of stuff because you're sitting on this stuff, yeah? And letting it go, and I can only speak from my personal experience when I forgave people in my life, what a release that was to finally be able to get rid of that. And you mentioned about shackles and so forth, you know. I was hanging on to stuff. I got rid of my stuff when I was 45. Yeah?
Right. That's a long time, Jim, to be hanging on to that sort of thing.
It is, but you know, the devil got me and he tempted me with all the worldly things. And of course, some of those can be very satisfying, yeah?
Well, they can cover up really though, Jim, isn't it? A lot of these coping mechanisms. Up. That's right. Yeah. Well, a lot of these coping mechanisms are like, I mean, we all know that injecting heroin or whatever it is, people are injecting makes you feel good for a short time and it doesn't solve your problems. Everyone knows that in theory, but what we don't realize is that we use other things in the same way. Some people just use food that way. You know, food makes me feel good when I eat it, so I eat lots of it because it and as one of the comedians, I think it's Jim Gaffigan, says, it's either that or feel my feelings. You know, we kind of substitute some kind of momentary thrill for actually worrying about how we feel. But the drug can be, and I think you've mentioned this before, Jim, the drug could be something like booze, which is readily available and not the same thing as, putting an injection in your arm initially, but just as destructive. Or it could be pornography, or it could just be some people
workaholism.
Workaholism is a big one, isn't it, in the men?
It's huge.
It's huge.
And I got roped right into that because I was trying to get some acknowledgement for my worthiness, if you like, from outside. Yep. Yeah. And I worked 70 hours a week.
The trouble with that, mate, is that if you work, you said 70 hours a week, if you work that hard, you put your whole life into it, the company does not care about you.
No.
Your work doesn't care. They might give you a cheap watch or even expensive watch at the end of it, but that's not anywhere near the acknowledgement of a lifetime self-giving. And why give yourself in that? I'm not saying don't work, but why pour your identity into something that is simply not about you, and it's not about affirming you. It's about using you, in fact.
Well, but I was letting myself being used because I was yearning for this acknowledgement. Oh, you've done great. You've got another big contract in.
Right.
Because I never got that as a kid.
Right.
So finally somebody said, oh, you're worth something. Go out there and get those big contracts. Go and work 70 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jim, part of this is allowing ourselves to be a victim, because we want something like the affirmation from the company or from our workmates or from our boss or something. We're desperate for affirmation, so we submit ourselves to this level of use. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, that's exactly right, and it has been when I got trapped in this victim consciousness that because of what I had suffered, I blamed those people who hurt me for the bad life that I'm having or for the unsettled life that I was having.
Right.
Until I got to the point where I realized that those people were also very broken, very hurt, and I didn't do that on purpose to damage me.
Right.
I was just part and parcel of their story. Yeah.
Yeah, so their victimhood was playing out in a way which hurt you as well and made you a victim as well.
Yeah.
Now, we should be clear at this point that this isn't excusing any kind of behavior or excusing any kind of abuse of anybody, and that all such people should be held accountable for those actions. But
definitely,
in terms of our personal response to being trapped in this cycle, one way out is to actually see the humanness in others and try to let that anger and hurt go, so that it doesn't rule us, so that it doesn't define us.
That's correct. So when I was 45 years of age, my mother was on her deathbed, and I was able to, before she took her last breath, to say to her, I forgive you for the hurt that you have given me all my life. You weren't there for me, you didn't care for me. And at that stage, something just lifted off me to be able to verbalize that. And I know there was always this feeling of love and hatred towards my mum. But to be able to, at the last hour, so to speak, to put my arms around her and say to her, I love you. That was powerful.
It's powerful. And clearly, Jim, even it's not only that moment which is powerful, but for those of us hearing this now and for so many people who've heard you tell that story liberates them to see this as a legitimate part of it could be a legitimate part of their story.
Yeah.
And can you give us an example, Jim, of someone else who has heard a story from a man who's had that kind of healing, and then it's inspired them to go on and do make some changes in their own life?
Well, I was just talking to somebody actually that I met about 3 years ago when we had a retreat at Schoenstatt out at Margoa, and it was all about our personal ideal. Yeah. And he was probably in his mid-50s or so, and he was totally broken. He didn't tell me his story at that stage, but something just resonated with him during that weekend. And I hadn't seen him for about 3 years, and I met him about 2 days ago. And wow, he was a changed man. That retreat, being amongst men, hearing this sort of thing that our mother is there to love us, our spiritual mother, Mary, is there to love us and bring us closer through Jesus and the Holy Spirit to our Heavenly Father. That sort of really resonated with him because he had a very difficult relationship with his mum and his father.
Mm-hmm.
And he, like me, he then took on Mary as a spiritual mother. And that retreat, really, he said to me there, and tears in my eyes, I just thought, wow. And sometimes you don't know when you hold these retreats or whatever you do or meeting, what sort of effect that has on people. But to hear him, how he has grown over the last 3 years, just absolutely amazing.
But let's come back to the story element of it, Jim. It is often the case with men that you can talk about theory with them, but I think you said in our episode, prior episode, men are practical beings. You know, we like to do stuff. But when we hear stories, they speak to us right in the, you know, I'm not saying women don't have the same sense, but certainly when men hear other men talk about their own struggle and about how they've come through, and that they've become stronger by being vulnerable. They've become stronger by forgiving. They've become stronger by not letting hurt from the past define them. And they've become stronger by rejecting self-destructive coping behaviors. And also one of the things that telling your story does is it helps to free you from the danger of repeating the story over and over and over again. It helps you break the cycle. In the sort of ministries that you're involved in, Jim, as far as I've seen from, you know, I've been involved in a couple of them, but as far as I've seen in the group work, often it's just men sharing their stories with other men. Would you say that's...
Yes.
And so the power of that movement, if you like, seems to be in that storytelling. Yeah,
it definitely is. And one thing that really stuck out with our conversation there with this guy a couple of days ago was, and I went through that same experience, a light went off. Wounded people wound people. I could very much relate to that because I was very wounded and broken. So I wasn't able to be there for my wife, for instance, who was an ex-wife, who was an alcoholic.
Right.
Because I hadn't dealt with my own hurt and problems that I had. So I thought that all the problems were because of the alcohol.
Right.
And I didn't look at myself.
Yeah.
And he had a very similar story. And he then also talked about the different relationships that he had where he took that woundedness into that relationship. It never really got to the healing part.
Let's go over that again, Jim, that wounded people wound people, I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
Now, wounded people do wound people, but I guess what I'm getting at here is that this telling of the story of our wounds and how we have come to begin the healing journey. It's not about having won the whole battle. I think, Jim, and you and I would agree we're still on the journey.
Yes, definitely.
But the story of coming to face our wounds and actually start to see healing is it changes the wound into almost an asset. I mean, the wound then, if we're honest about it and it's up front, I mean, clearly in a safe and properly set up environment.
Yes,
you don't just tell everybody because it can be a hurtful thing and a dangerous thing. But obviously in a proper setting, when you've got good men around you who have the love of God in them, you can turn the wound into a positive because being honest about it then makes it a powerful story of redemption. And that story can actually inspire others. It also, I have to say, telling the story makes me feel powerful about my own life. Instead of all the lies that your own head tells you, you're weird, you're the only person who's feeling this, you're actually a failure, you're not good enough to be a man, and if you tell people, they're going to mock you and laugh at you and think ill of you. When the story is told and it's out there, even if one person has a go, it's just one person. And actually the reality is most people respect a real story. Most people, even if they don't agree with all that's happened, they respect it.
Oh, they do, definitely. And I always relate it to a physical wound, if you like, because you know yourself, if you leave a Band-Aid on a wound long enough, it festers.
Yes.
And that's what's happened with us, with our soul.
And even the smallest wound in that case, Jim, will kill you because it festers so much it poisons you.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you rip it off, it hurts.
Yes.
And so it is with our soul, with our being, that when we really get to that stuff, it hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts.
Now, Jim, in terms of, now we want to be careful here and say that there are some wounds which go so deep they require professional help, just like, a
definitely.
small cut in the backyard might be able to be dealt with a bit of, antiseptic and a Band-Aid. If we need stitches, we need to go to a professional.
Yep,
and
definitely.
That doesn't exclude talking to mates about it, but
no,
the beginning, if you like, the first amount of courage to speak up might actually result in, and I've had this happen to a number of people, and it happened to myself once, where someone's listened to a story, an ordinary bloke has listened to a story and said, dude, I think that's more serious than just having a yarn. I think you need to go and talk to someone about that. Now that, it can be scary to hear that, but it's like being told, hey, you need some stitches, bud, get yourself to the hospital.
And we're not good at that sometimes, are we, listening to that sort of stuff, because we're these strong guys, we got to push through and whatever, But you're definitely right. And look, for me, it has been such a beautiful journey, and I always related to the footsteps in the sand. Right. I was carried by our Lord so many times, and whenever he set me down, zing, I went off the road again. And look, the devil is there. When you're not healed, the devil finds a way in there, I believe. In my case, certainly.
Well, we certainly have in us a kind of a nature that seeks out the easy path. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with a small cut or even a large cut, it's easier not to have someone poke at it and prod at it and inject it and stitch it. So you'd much rather cover it up with something that just like a Panadol or something and make it go away for a short time. And then it's only when we get to the desperation stakes we come for help. But Jim, one of the things about telling stories is that it's incredibly valuable for young men learning. Now, we mentioned in our first episode on masculinity that one of the problems in the modern world is that the young kids don't really have positive, strong examples of masculinity. They have what's on the media, they have what's in advertising, but they don't seem to, and they have sports stars who are going around doing all sorts of silly things, but they don't seem to have a good, strong, ordinary, positive role model. And one of the things that tends to happen is they don't tend to listen to older men. There's nowhere. I think you were mentioning a young fellow who showed up to a men's group and there were lots of old men there, and he's going, oh, where's all my young mates? But that turned out okay for him, didn't it?
Look, he was actually, the dynamics of that sometimes are tremendous there, Us old guys, we were encouraged by him being there because we were where he was at, but we let our faith go. Now, he is a guy in his mid-20s wanting to do something about his faith and being vulnerable at this meeting there with all older guys. And for him, it was good to see that even at our age, we are having these struggles as well. Yeah. So the dynamics of that really, and he couldn't get enough of it. He just stayed, for the next 3 meetings. So that was good to see, actually.
I mean, I think we need to get over this whole idea of not hanging out with people or being friends with people who are older than us and younger than us. There seems to be almost a regretful sadness in older people I meet that they don't think that younger people want to have anything to do with them or listen to them, possibly because we've told them we're bored by their stories or something. But on the other angle, there doesn't seem to be, A, the time for us to sit with older people and listen, or B, there doesn't seem to be, like, our society is not structured in the same way as it used to be. We don't hang out with older people in our regular life. If they're not at our work or if they're not, living next door, we don't really see them. Like, there's not a local community where the old guy down the shop or the fellow who hangs out near the mechanic or something in my country town, you would come across them all the time. I wonder how we could deal with this, Jim. I mean, one way is the way you're doing it, which is creating groups dedicated for men to talk and listen and learn from each other. Do you think there's any other way we can listen to stories?
Look, there's definitely another way there, and I've had that experience. I've got 2 daughters and nearly 6 grandchildren. One is on the way, so I could get a call any time here. So,
congratulations.
But it's close. But look, what stood out for me in those 25 years of facilitating this was these stories came up and over again, yeah? That sometimes parents are not able to let go of their children.
Right.
And the worst case that I listened to is that one parent, couple, followed their children around all over Australia to be near them.
Right.
Yeah. So they were not able to let go of it. And from that, we say that, okay, at some stage of your children's life, we need to say to them, okay, I'll always be your father, I'll always be your mother or whatever, but our relationship has to change.
Right.
Yeah. Father, son, daughters, or whatever. But we now need to talk at an adult level.
Right.
And I did that with both of my daughters when they were 21 or around about that age.
Right.
And it just, the relationship just changed dramatically.
For the better, do you think, Jim?
Sorry?
For the better, do you think?
Oh, for the better. I respected them for being adults and also for making mistakes and allowing them to make mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing there, allowing kids to make mistakes, because one of the worst things as a kid is to hear your parents, judging you. And
yes.
You need the space to do that. You need the space to learn from your own mistakes. And to be honest, I think parents need to be more realistic about it, because we give them the tools to be adults, but we don't. Making the decisions means that they're not adults yet. So we've got to respect that. But coming back to the interaction then between parents and kids, if you give them that space, Jim, that gives them the space to then come back and ask for advice as an adult.
And how good is that when your children come to you? Like my daughter is having her 40th birthday.
Wow. Yeah? Okay.
In the next day or two. Now, whenever I just let her live her life, or let them live their life, but whenever they come to me and say, oh, Lord, Dad, I'm struggling here, but that is so beautiful. Yeah. Rather than me watching them and saying, oh, you're doing this wrong, you should be doing this, you should be doing that.
Yeah.
The feeling of just having your daughter come to you and saying, Dad, I'm struggling with this, what do you think?
Well, that's wonderful, Jim, and I'm very touched to hear that you have that relationship with your daughters. But let's talk to perhaps people in the listeners who have perhaps not that relationship with their own parents due to past strains or different problems.
Yep.
Or perhaps they haven't had that relationship with their own kids, and there's whatever's happened in the past, we can't change that. You can always build on the relationship you've got starting from today. You can always change a relationship over time. There's no guarantee other people will accept that change, but I would put the feelers out wider than that, Jim. There are, in this suburb that I'm in, there are many older people living in their houses, and they're visited very rarely by their family or friends, but they're still in a community. And it wouldn't take a huge amount just to listen to them and to be engaged with them and to actually talk to them and affirm them and say, hey, I really like the fact that you live next door. I really like the fact that we have a chat every day. Can you tell me what's going on with that, that particular plant you're planting there? Or I don't know. I'm a really bad gardener, so that was a bad example because I wouldn't know what I'm doing. But the point is
I'm a bad gardener too, so I can relate to that. Yeah.
But just the whole point is that just to simply engage people who we meet, not necessarily everybody, but people who are clearly part of our community, or especially if we're, Catholics, in our church community, young people listening. There are so many people in the churches right now who come to church and they go away and nobody's engaging either the young or the older people because we're not used to that culture. Very simple conversations can start genuine relationships. Some of my best friendships in not just the Catholic Church, but in other churches have begun with a very simple, ordinary, small talk conversation after church sometime.
And often that's the way it goes, doesn't it? You know, like just a quick hello or something like that. We like one story that came out at our meeting at the ACBC gathering was that one guy had moved to another suburb there, and he was just sort of sitting there in the church, and it was about 9 months or something, he said, before somebody actually said hello to him.
Yeah.
And noticed him. Yeah. And he was a bit shy reaching out. Yeah.
It just seems really crazy, Jim, that we're in a community where, particularly young men, particularly among men, we've got a situation where we're desperate for community, particularly with other men, and we're desperate for, we have this need, most of us aren't aware of it consciously, but we have this desperate need for brotherhood, you know, and fatherhood, and yet we're surrounded by other people who have the same kind of loneliness, and it's only really going to take a few tentative steps, a little bit of bravery, not a huge amount, to step out and actually touch base with other people and find out that, yeah, they're a little bit weird, but so am I. You know, I can hang out with them. We can have a chat. We can, the friendships of all varieties and colours could come together and be really beneficial to us all.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that there, Peter, because in the couple of groups that we've started since we started with this men's ministry thing is that after a while, men just start to say, okay, what can we do? What can we do for the community?
Yes.
Because we are basically doing people, you know, we sort of, okay, we're on the spiritual journey in these groups.
Yep.
But for us, generally, there's more. What can we do? What can we do? And what you said is something that's come up a couple of times in groups. Why don't we do that? Why don't we visit some of these older people? Why don't we mow their lawns or whatever it is? So that's another benefit that comes out of this men gathering together.
The working groups have worked really well in all sorts of places. But when I was back in, listeners might not be aware, I was a Lutheran minister before I became a Catholic. When I was a Lutheran minister, I had a whole bunch of young teenagers who had no fathers or you know, struggled with their fathers in the parish. And I had a bunch of 40-year-old men, 40 to 45-year-old men who were struggling with their identity, a midlife crisis kind of thing. And I couldn't get them to hang out together. I just couldn't get them in the same room because oh, no, that's the old guys. Oh, that's the young kids. They don't want to talk to me. So I started an indoor soccer team, and I said to the old guys, hey, look, we'd really appreciate you coming along. The young guys could really use some mentors. All you have to do is kick the ball around and be there for them and be a bit mature. And then I said to the young kids, hey, these old guys are starting a team. They're rubbish at this. They really need your usual enthusiasm and skills. And I brought them in. And that community, from that group of young kids kicking around a ball with the older guys, they went back after every game and shot pool together and had a pizza together after every game. And it became quite a strong thing. And the young kids were coming eagerly to church because they knew people there who they could talk to and, you know, relate to. And the old guys asked them about their exams and all sorts of things like that. So if you give them something to do, a focus where they're actually relating to each other, that can be a really strong thing.
Yeah. No, definitely. I agree with that. Yeah. But also, look, what I've experienced in my journey is I've had many attachments that were not so healthy. Yeah. Right. And these were the temptations by the devil. Once I sort of worked out that Mary was my mother because Jesus gave her to us as our mother. Yep. I formed a attachment to her. Right. Very deeply. Yeah. And I know from all my experience in the human life, people let you down. Right. In whatever way or form. Sure. But just to have the comfort that Mary or Jesus or the Holy, whatever, or a saint or something, they will be there for you on your journey. Yeah. And that for me, to learn that was so important for me that I knew that, yes, okay, it's all out there. You can't put your hand on it or whatever. But just having my relationship with our mother has really helped me so much on my spiritual journey and has given me this comfort and contentness, if you like, in my life. Yeah. It's that I'm on the journey.
I'm glad you mentioned your mother, Jim, because we have focused quite a lot in this and the last episode on fatherhood and the relationship with our fathers. And that is a really important part of a young man's identity and an older man's identity too. But we should have talked about mothers too, because our relationship with our mother defines us very much in how we relate to other women. And as you say, and I've had a similar experience, Jim, that once we've talked about spiritual motherhood, and Mary in particular is the example of that spiritual motherhood, and her love for the church, and that she's given to the church as a mother by Christ on the cross. That can be a hugely healing element, but it can also heal, because as you mentioned, some of the distractions we seek, some of the coping mechanisms we look for are related to just, ugly things. Like we look for sensual pleasures, we look for, we get addicted to the thrills of various things, that when we focus on what's good, true, and beautiful, like our Heavenly Father and our Heavenly Mother, then it's much purer, and we can focus on what's good. Let's bring it home, though. The telling the stories thing becomes real when some part of the story is extremely damaging. It's something we've done and then we're ashamed of. That part of a story in the Catholic understanding goes to confession and is told to Jesus Christ himself, the ultimate of our brothers. And we tell that story in the confidentiality. And this is one of the key things right now in our political arena in Australia, is that the confidentiality of the confessional is come under attack. It's so important that we can tell that story with pure confidence that it's going to be kept, between us and God, and that the final answer in that confessional is, I forgive you all your sins, says Christ. Yeah. And that's a new start. And that, as Pope Benedict, often we don't want to approach confession. We're scared of it. We're saying, we have this irrational fear. What if he doesn't forgive me? But as Pope Benedict says, we should never be afraid to ask God for what he wants to give us. God wants us to be forgiven. He wants to embrace us. He wants to take us back. And all we need to do is put the story in front of him, and the beauty and peace of forgiveness comes from there.
It does. And look, that was a huge thing for me there. Taking on the Catholic faith and being able to say that in confession. But what was more healing, actually? And I only did this about 5-10 years ago now with my daughters, that I set them down. Well, not really set them down, but I invited them along, and I said, I need to tell my story. They didn't know my background. Right. They didn't know what I was doing, what I did, and why I did it. Yeah. Okay. They knew me as a very strict father. Mother would say, wait till your dad comes home, and they were quivering, So there was a fear in them, and that hurt me very much to hear that when they said that to me. But that healing, Peter, that was even more beneficial for me than in the confessional, I must say. Right. Because in the confessional, as you said, sometimes you say, is he really forgiving me? But when you're sitting with your children and you're telling your story, and they say, we now know why this happened. Okay. And we forgive you. We know that you were working to give us a good home. Wow. To hear that from your children, it's a wow factor. Yeah? It is. And I guess, Jim, I need to mention, sometimes we don't hear that. On 2 occasions in my life, I've attempted to open up to someone who hurt me, and one person who I know I hurt. And they were, I'm not talking about massive things in my case, but in at least 2 of those occasions, the person themselves wasn't ready and couldn't say that. Now, that's important to know. It is important to know, but I have to say, Jim, it was still important for me to have told my father what hurt me, but also that I forgave him, even though he wasn't ready to hear it. And now I'm very, very grateful that I told him before he died, because it's now, I have no regrets about that. I have nothing's unsaid, if you like. I don't regret not going there. So it's worth saying, even if the response isn't perfect. Clearly a beautiful response is a beautiful thing, but it's worth going there, even if someone's not ready, depending on, of course, on circumstances. But all right. So what we've really talked about this episode is the power of stories, and the power of men's stories, and how healing, love, and new starts can happen because of stories, but also that we can learn from other men's stories if we're prepared to listen
and hear them. And hopefully we can learn from their mistakes as well as their wins.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's it for this week's podcast then. If today's discussion got you thinking or telling us that we were wrong to your podcast device, let us know. You can subscribe to the podcast at thiscatholiclife.com.au. Let us know on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook or Discord what you think or what we should do another episode on. I think we're already lining one up on raising boys and how we go about raising boys in this modern world. But if you've got any other ideas, that'd be great to hear from you. Make sure you review us on iTunes, get the word out to other people. I think that a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast is a good idea, so tell your friends. And before we go, it's time for shout-outs. Jim, do you want to say hello to anyone?
Oh, look, I just want to say hello to my daughter there. I know she probably won't listen to that, but she's just going through this time, like she's over it. She wants it. She wants to have the baby. And I just hope everything goes well and bless her. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm going to say a shout out to the men who are at home. They're used to work. They're used to work defining them. They're at home feeling lonely and sort of at a loose end. Stay strong, men. And I mean by that, don't fall easily into destructive habits or lazy habits. Think of things you can do for others, even if you can't go to them. Think of things that you can do with your power. Use your strengths. Be a friend to those in need, especially those who are perhaps even more lonely, perhaps even more stuck than you are. The older guys who've got a wealth of experience and love to give. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.